When I look ahead to Days of Our Lives for the week of June 29th through July 3rd, I think the emotional fallout between Ariana Horton and Gabby Hernandez could end up overshadowing almost everything else happening in Salem. To me, Gabby crossed a line the moment she secretly paid Liam Saleko to disappear from Ari's life. I understand that she probably believed she was protecting her daughter, but I don't think Ari is going to see it that way at all. From Ari's perspective, this feels like betrayal and manipulation wrapped up as parental concern. I was wondering whether this could be the moment that completely changes their mother-daughter relationship. Ari seems ready to make a statement of her own, and I wouldn't be surprised if she refuses to speak to Gabby entirely for a while. There is even a chance she decides she can't stay under the same roof as her mother anymore, and starts looking for somewhere else to spend the summer. No matter how hard Gabby tries to repair the damage, I get the feeling she's heading for a long stretch of rejection and icy silence. Another major development arrives on June 30th, with Jacob Martinez taking over the role of Javi Hernandez. Recasts always bring a different energy, and I'm curious to see what kind of version of Javi he brings to the screen. Ironically, just when Javi wants distance from Leo Stark, it feels inevitable that fate will throw them back together. Their history is still there, the feelings probably haven't disappeared, and the introduction of Javi's new boyfriend Gus could make things even messier. I may be wrong, but jealousy seems almost unavoidable in this situation. Meanwhile, the Corosil investigation looks like it's becoming one of the biggest stories on the canvas. Sarah Horton and Brady Black continue digging for answers, but what really caught my attention is Johnny DiMera stepping into the mission alongside Brady and Steve Johnson at Black Patch. Johnny investigating DiMera Pharmaceuticals feels especially dangerous because he's not just chasing a mystery, he's potentially uncovering secrets tied directly to his own family. I think he's getting closer to evidence of a cover-up, and once that door opens, there may be no turning back. That puts EJ DiMera in a very uncomfortable position. Johnny seems determined to follow the truth wherever it leads, even if that truth points straight at his father. Speaking of EJ, his feud with Xander Kyriakis appears ready to explode again. Just as Xander and Sarah seem to be making progress, EJ may end up destroying that fragile peace. I honestly wonder if EJ is underestimating just how dangerous and angry Xander can be. Kristen and DiMera has already floated the idea of eliminating EJ permanently, and if Xander feels that his family and future are being threatened again, I can see why revenge might start looking appealing to him, even if he ultimately doesn't cross that line. At the same time, there's another mystery hanging over Kristen herself. Since spoilers point toward her becoming a kidnapping victim later this summer, I can't help asking whether EJ could somehow be connected. It may be a misdirection, but Salem history has taught viewers never to rule anything out. Then there is the chessboard mystery involving Chad DiMera and Belle Black. As they continue following clues, another story may be quietly building in the background, one involving Lexi Carver. Her return was already surrounded by complicated medical science and Dr. Wilhelm Rolf's intervention, so I've been wondering whether her recovery was ever truly permanent. If Lexi's symptoms begin returning, it could mean that Rolf's adjusted booster dose only bought her more time, rather than saving her completely. That possibility may be one of the saddest developments of the entire summer storyline. The idea that Lexi could once again be facing death, after fighting so hard to come back, feels incredibly tragic. Of course, this is Salem, where miracles and disasters often arrive side by side, so I'm not ready to count Lexi out just yet. But I do think the show wants viewers to start preparing for some heartbreaking possibilities. I think Susan Banks returning to Salem this summer could be much more important than it first appears. If there is one character in Days of Our Lives who always seems to sense danger before anyone else, it is Susan. Her visions and instincts have warned people countless times in the past, especially when the people she loves are involved. This time, I was wondering if her concern will center entirely on EJ DiMera and the person he is slowly becoming. From my perspective, Susan may arrive in Salem with a terrifying realization. EJ is walking down the same road that once turned Stefano DiMera into one of Salem's greatest villains. And knowing Susan, she probably will not stay quiet about it. I can already imagine Susan insisting that EJ is not Stefano and never has to become him. To her, EJ is still her son, not the Phoenix. She may fight harder than anyone else to pull him back before it is too late. Of course, EJ probably will not appreciate hearing that comparison. Maybe he argues that there was good in Stefano too, or perhaps he convinces himself that the DiMera family needs a ruthless leader to survive. Part of me thinks EJ may even believe that embracing some of Stefano's methods is necessary to protect his family and his empire. Still, I cannot ignore how much EJ has changed recently. Ever since he slipped Stefano's ring onto his finger, there seems to have been a noticeable shift in him. Maybe I am wrong, but it feels as if the ring has become more than a symbol of power. It almost feels like a reminder of the legacy EJ believes he has to live up to. The timing certainly is suspicious. Now, EJ appears connected to the Corosil-related deaths and the cover-up surrounding DiMera Pharmaceuticals. On top of that, his threats toward Kristen suggest he is becoming more willing to use fear and intimidation to get what he wants. Even Gwen seems to believe EJ is capable of crossing deadly lines, which says a lot considering everything she has seen and done herself. If people around EJ are genuinely starting to fear him, maybe that fear becomes part of the problem. I have always found it interesting how characters sometimes become exactly what everyone expects them to become. The more EJ is treated like a monster, the easier it may be for him to justify acting like one. There is also the issue of Lexi. EJ played a major role in bringing her back, but if she begins slipping toward tragedy once again, I suspect many people in Salem will place that blame squarely on his shoulders as well. That only adds to the darkness gathering around him. To me, Susan's fears may end up being completely justified. She could return with warnings, visions, and desperate pleas for her son to change course. But I am not convinced anyone will be able to stop what is coming. The real question is not whether EJ is becoming Salem's next Stefano. The question may be whether EJ has already made that choice himself. If that is where this story is heading, Salem could be on the verge of watching the rise of a new DiMera patriarch, one willing to embrace the worst parts of Stefano's legacy while convincing himself he is doing it for all the right reasons. And if that happens, the chaos that follows may only be the beginning. Watching all of this unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that Salem may be heading into one of those classic conspiracy storylines where the truth has been sitting in plain sight for years. The whole mystery surrounding Destiny's death suddenly feels much bigger than a single tragedy. Sarah starts connecting dots between Destiny's case and an older cluster of deaths involving Corosil. And the moment DiMera Pharmaceuticals enters the conversation, even Kayla immediately senses danger. To me, that reaction says everything. In Salem, the DiMera name almost never appears next to unexplained deaths by coincidence. What really caught my attention was how quickly Steve and Brady shifted into investigation mode. Brady joining Black Patch feels surprisingly natural, even if Steve officially welcomed him after he'd already started working the case. Their theory that tainted drugs may have been sold on the streets through DiMera operatives is alarming enough, but the possibility that EJ may have known about it raises the stakes dramatically. Johnny ends up in an impossible position. He's being asked to investigate his own family without tipping off his father, and that kind of conflict always makes for compelling drama. I don't think Johnny knows nearly as much as everyone assumes he does, but the fact that lives may depend on him pushes him to step up anyway. Meanwhile, Xander continues to exist in that strange gray area where he's simultaneously helpful and deeply suspicious. His exchange with Sarah almost made me laugh. Sarah asks whether any old DiMera records survived the merger, and Xander immediately jumps to, "Of course nothing was scrubbed. That would be unethical." The fact that Sarah simply stared at him says more than words ever could. Yet despite the jokes and sarcasm, Xander's concern feels genuine. He warns Sarah not to confront EJ directly and reminds her just how dangerous he can be. Whatever else may be true about Xander, I think part of him still wants to protect her. On the personal side of things, Alex, Stephanie, and Joy are walking straight into the kind of emotional minefield that never has easy answers. Alex rushing to the hospital after Joy's panicked phone call initially looked like another example of him being pulled away from Stephanie at a moment's notice. Then comes the reveal that Kelsey had simply been frightened after getting her shots, and that the real issue involved insurance costs. The problem is that facts and feelings aren't always operating on the same level. From Stephanie's perspective, it probably doesn't matter that the hospital visit was routine. What she sees is Alex dropping everything and running to Joy's side instantly. I can understand why that would trigger fears about where she fits into this new family dynamic. Kayla tries to offer the more charitable interpretation that it was all just a misunderstanding, but Stephanie's suspicion that Joy may have intentionally created urgency to pull Alex in doesn't feel entirely unreasonable either. Whether Joy meant to manipulate the situation or not, the result was exactly the same. Alex showed up. The therapy discussion may have been one of the most revealing moments in the episode. Stephanie admitting there could be attachment wounds from childhood gives some important context to her reactions. I appreciated that the story didn't reduce her feelings to jealousy alone. She's wrestling with deeper fears about abandonment, belonging, and whether there's room for her in Alex's new reality. And Alex doesn't exactly help matters. When Stephanie asks the obvious question, "What does this look like long term?" he has no answer at all. That silence may end up being more damaging than anything Joy does. Finally, the episode closes with two parallel investigations hitting the same wall. Xander reaches out through unofficial channels for DiMera records from 2 years ago, while Johnny searches on his own. Both discover the same thing. The files are gone. Whenever Salem starts deleting records, I usually assume someone worked very hard to make sure they disappeared. Whether that points to EJ, someone inside DiMera Pharmaceuticals, or an entirely different player remains to be seen. But if those missing files connect to a string of deaths, this story may be much larger and much darker than anyone realizes. I've always accepted that soap opera time operates under its own strange laws. Characters age overnight, holidays somehow stretch across entire weeks, and on days of our lives, I'm still not entirely convinced anyone in Salem knows what year it actually is. But this latest timeline issue caught my attention because it feels far more obvious than the usual soap opera elasticity. As Brady and Sarah continue investigating Destiny's death and the tainted drugs connected to it, they discover that there was apparently a wave of deaths back in 2024 tied to DiMera Pharmaceuticals' Corosil. Steve and Brady even begin suspecting that EJ may have been responsible for directing those dangerous drugs onto the streets because, according to the story, he was running DiMera at the time. Except, I don't think that's true. I went back and checked the timeline because something about it immediately felt off to me. Gabby was sent to prison in 2023 for Lee's murder, and the man responsible for putting her there was EJ himself, while serving as Salem's district attorney. He remained DA throughout most of 2024, and only lost the position around the time Arnold Feniger returned to town. So unless I'm missing something, EJ wasn't CEO of DiMera during the period these deaths supposedly happened. Soap timelines bend all the time, but this feels different. The events they're referencing aren't ancient history buried decades in the past. They're recent enough that viewers actually remember them. I'm clearly not the only one who noticed the discrepancy either. And honestly, that worries me. Part of me wonders if the writers are intentionally rewriting history because they've decided to remove whatever moral ambiguity EJ still had left. because if he really is responsible for this, there may be no coming back from it. The darkest possibility I can think of ties directly into Dr. Rolfe and his resurrection experiments. Lexi has technically been dead for nearly 15 years. Maybe VersaVix finally provided the breakthrough Dr. Rolfe needed to perfect the process. But I find myself wondering whether EJ and Rolfe have been working toward bringing Lexi back for much longer than we've realized. What if Corosil wasn't simply a pharmaceutical disaster? What if the street version of the drug existed because EJ needed test subjects? It's horrifying to think about, but I can imagine a scenario where victims were intentionally exposed to experimental treatments, their bodies preserved afterward, while Rolfe continued refining the resurrection technology. Maybe the victims were specifically chosen because EJ assumed nobody would come looking for them. Addicts buying drugs off the street, people society tends to overlook. And maybe, in EJ's own twisted logic, he justified it to himself by believing they would all eventually come back once the science worked. No harm done if everyone survives in the end. That's exactly the kind of morally warped reasoning I could see someone like EJ convincing himself to believe. We already know there are supposedly other candidates waiting for resurrection. EJ practically confirmed that while talking with Gwen. Most of us immediately assumed familiar names like Peter were sitting somewhere in cryogenic storage, waiting for their return. But what if that's not the case? What if there are dozens of frozen bodies we've never met because they were victims rather than family members? If that turns out to be true, I honestly think EJ crosses a line he can never uncross. Of course, maybe none of the deaths were intentional. But even in the best possible scenario, Johnny discovering that the 2024 Corosil records had been erased tells me somebody knew exactly what happened. If EJ helped distribute dangerous drugs for profit, whether to fund the resurrection research or simply to make money, that's still a level of darkness we've never really seen from him before. Ever since EJ started wearing Stefano's Phoenix ring again, I've noticed him becoming more ruthless. But until now, there has always been some degree of gray area surrounding his actions. His work on Lexi was ethically questionable, absolutely, but the motivation was love for his sister. Manipulating Theo out of DiMera was shady, but arguably aligned with Abe's wishes. Trying to kill Vivian after learning she orchestrated the DiMera kidnappings was extreme. But then again, we're talking about Vivian Alamain. Even whatever revenge he may be planning against Kristen comes after she nearly killed his son. There was always a balance, a justification, an argument to be made. But mass deaths caused by greed, ambition, or scientific obsession? I don't see a gray area there. If EJ knowingly sacrificed innocent people to achieve his goals, then I think the character fundamentally changes. At that point, he isn't a complicated anti-hero anymore. He's simply a villain. He becomes Stefano. And if that's really where this story is heading, then I think Days of Our Lives may have rewritten its own history, not because it had to, but because it wanted to erase the final traces of humanity left inside EJ DiMera. If I'm right, Salem should be terrified, because a fully unleashed EJ, who has finally become his father, may end up being more dangerous than anything the town has faced in years. When I look at Thursday's Days of Our Lives, the first thing that jumps out at me is Kristen suddenly finding herself in an unfamiliar position, the damsel in distress. Kristen insisted she had nothing to do with Sophia supposedly being pushed toward killing Johnny, but EJ clearly wasn't convinced. To me, that changes everything. Once EJ decides someone is a threat, he doesn't exactly let things go. Kristen may have just earned herself a very dangerous enemy. And things only became worse after EJ learned Kristen was also preparing to go after him professionally. Then Rita's information about the DiMera drugs potentially being linked to deaths entered the picture, and now EJ has even more reasons to silence problems before they become scandals. I was wondering who Kristen would turn to for protection, and apparently the answer is Xander. On paper, it makes sense. He's powerful, intimidating, and not someone most people want to cross. The complication, of course, is Sarah. Sarah is already asking Xander for help investigating DiMera's activities, so if Xander eventually has to choose between supporting Kristen or helping Sarah, it feels like an easy decision. At least, it should be. But this is Salem, and emotions tend to complicate logic. If Xander discovers Sarah has been doing her detective work alongside Brady, I can absolutely see his jealousy or anger pushing him in an unexpected direction. Maybe instead of helping Sarah, he decides to punish both her and Brady by siding with Kristen instead. Honestly, that possibility makes this entire situation much more entertaining. Xander, Sarah, Brady, and Kristen create a surprisingly messy and unpredictable dynamic, and I think this storyline could go in several different directions. Meanwhile, Sarah's search for Liam is creating problems elsewhere. Ari seems to have connected the dots and realized Gabby may be responsible for driving Liam out of Salem. The only thing missing now is confirmation from Gabby herself. Whether Gabby tells the truth or tries to spin this situation is another question entirely. At the same time, Holly is dealing with panic over Amy's lawsuit. But what caught my attention is that Holly apparently believes she has figured out what is really happening behind the scenes. That makes me think the lawsuit story may be hiding a much bigger secret than viewers initially expected. If Holly really does know the truth, then the question becomes whether she can prove it before events spiral even further out of control. For me, the most intriguing part of this episode remains the Xander situation. Does loyalty win out? Does jealousy take over? Or does Kristen somehow convince Xander that protecting her is in his best interest? With this group of characters, I honestly wouldn't rule anything out. I keep coming back to one question about this entire mystery. Why did Stefano create it in the first place? Stefano DiMera has been gone for years, and yet somehow he is still finding ways to make life more complicated for the people he spent decades obsessing over. This time, it comes through a chess set, a missing pawn, a hidden compartment, and an old Italian banknote that seems to be setting one final game in motion. To me, the real mystery isn't what the clue means. It's why Stefano wanted John and Marlena pulled back into his orbit one last time. For most people, a chess set is simply a game. For Stefano, chess almost felt like an extension of his personality. Throughout their lives, he treated John and Marlena as pieces on a board that only he could fully understand. Even now, long after his death, it feels as if he is still trying to control the game. The hidden 1,000 lira note may eventually lead to some forgotten secret involving Italy, Maison Blanche, or even the DiMera Empire itself. But I can't shake the feeling that the deeper purpose of this puzzle is much more personal than that. Stefano wasn't simply sending people on a treasure hunt. He was forcing Marlena to revisit their shared history. And if there was one thing Stefano enjoyed, it was reminding people that his influence never truly disappeared. The missing pawn feels especially intentional to me. He didn't leave behind a complete chess game. He left behind an unfinished one. Maybe I am wrong, but that missing piece feels symbolic. It could represent John. It could point toward another sleeper agent, a hidden family connection, or perhaps someone already standing in plain sight. Whatever the answer turns out to be, it feels perfectly in character for Stefano to make people chase it rather than simply reveal it. He never gave away answers easily. He preferred the pursuit. The timing of all this may be the most fascinating detail of the story. On paper, Stefano couldn't possibly have predicted the exact moment his death would finally be accepted, verified, and followed by the reading of his will. Yet somehow this mystery arrives at precisely the moment Marlena is grieving John and reflecting on a lifetime of memories. That doesn't feel accidental. It feels personal. I don't think Stefano is targeting Salem with this final puzzle. I think he is targeting the Black family. The chess set immediately drew Belle, Paul, and the next generation into the story. Just as he always did, Stefano seems to be using the people John and Marlena love as pieces in a much larger game. And maybe that's the biggest clue, hidden in plain sight. If Stefano had wanted to hide money, property, or some forgotten DiMera asset, there would have been far easier ways to do it. Instead, he created a puzzle centered around John, Marlena, a queen, and a missing pawn. That makes me wonder if the secret waiting at the end of this trail has very little to do with Italy at all. Maybe this final mystery isn't about a place or an inheritance. Maybe it's about the relationship that defined Stefano's entire life, his obsession with Marlena and his endless war with John Black. Because if Stefano DiMera taught us anything over the years, it's that even death doesn't always mean the game is over. When I first heard that Al Calderon's run as Javi Hernandez had quietly come to an end, I realized we had already seen his final episode without much fanfare. His last appearance aired on June 9th, and looking back at those scenes now, they feel a little more meaningful. Javi spent time with Gabby Hernandez asking his cousin for a favor before crossing paths with Leo Stark at Brady's pub, while Leo worked and kept an eye on little Kelsey. At the time, it just felt like another day in Salem. I don't think many viewers were watching those moments, realizing they were saying goodbye to Calderon's version of Javi. Now, Jacob Martinez is preparing to make his debut in the role on June 30th, and I was genuinely impressed by the way he chose to acknowledge the actor who came before him. Before even appearing on screen, Martinez took to Instagram to share a photo of himself alongside Calderon. What stood out to me was the respect and appreciation behind his message. He described Calderon as the man who passed him the brightest torch ever, and thanked him for his passion and love for both the show and the character. Martinez went on to say that Calderon's dedication inspires him to become the best version of Javi he can possibly be. To me, that says a lot about the kind of transition the show is aiming for. Rather than treating this as a replacement, it feels more like a passing of the baton. Even fellow cast member Javi Hernandez reacted warmly to the tribute, commenting that it made her heart happy. Moments like that make it clear that there was genuine affection behind the scenes for Calderon and his work. I think what makes this recast particularly interesting is how quickly Javi became important to the canvas after arriving in Salem in October 2024. As the cousin of Gabby and Rafe Hernandez, he easily could have remained a supporting figure in the background, but that never happened. His relationship with Leo Stark became one of the more surprising developments on the show. In many ways, Javi helped reshape Leo's story entirely. Watching Leo move away from schemes and manipulation towards something closer to redemption was not something I expected when the character first appeared years ago. Because Calderon was the original actor to bring Javi to life, there will naturally be comparisons. That always happens when a role is recast, especially when the previous performer made such a strong impression in a relatively short amount of time. Still, I think every actor eventually has to find their own version of a character, rather than imitate what came before. The biggest question now isn't whether Jacob Martinez can play Javi exactly like Al Calderon did. It's whether he can capture the heart of the character while adding something new that feels authentic to him. Whether viewers embrace the change immediately or need time to adjust, the next chapter of Javi Hernandez officially begins on June 30th, and I have a feeling Salem won't stay quiet for long. I think Wednesday's episode of Days of Our Lives looks like it could push several storylines into much more dangerous territory, especially the mystery surrounding the recent Corosil deaths in Salem. From my perspective, the biggest development is the investigation involving Brady Black and Sarah Horton. The two are set to work together, searching for answers, and I was wondering if the medical crisis involving Holly Jonas is finally going to connect all the dots. Holly's collapse at the Horton cabin never felt random to me. Once those strange symptoms started appearing after she began taking her prescribed antidepressants, it seemed increasingly likely that the medication itself was part of the problem. All signs appear to be pointing towards some kind of tampering or contamination, and I think this tainted drugs storyline could become much bigger than anyone in Salem expects. Meanwhile, across town, Javi Hernandez apparently catches Theo Carver completely off guard. Theo's feelings for Gabby have been obvious for a while, and now that she's single again, I can easily imagine the show testing the waters with the possibility of something more between them. Whether it turns into a genuine romance or simply an awkward but meaningful moment remains to be seen. The storyline that may carry the biggest emotional fallout, however, involves Liam Saleko and Ariana Horton. Liam disappeared without warning and left Salem behind, despite the flirtation and growing connection between him and Ari. They were never officially together, but there had been enough chemistry and shared moments that his sudden exit understandably felt like ghosting. Of course, the audience already knows there was more to the story. Liam didn't leave entirely on his own terms. Gabby secretly paid him to stay away from her daughter and leave Salem behind. I think the real explosion comes next. If Liam tells Ari the truth about her mother's involvement, the confrontation between Ari and Gabby could be fierce. To me, this feels less like a simple disagreement and more like the beginning of a major family fracture, built on secrets, manipulation, and misplaced protection. Whether Gabby believes she was protecting her daughter or controlling her choices may end up being the question that defines this conflict. Either way, I don't see Ari taking the revelation lightly, and Salem family battles have a habit of becoming far messier before they get better. Marlena Evans at 50, looking back at a Salem legend. I still find it incredible that Deidre Hall has now spent 50 years playing Marlena Evans on Days of Our Lives. Her first appearance aired on June 21st, 1976, and somehow it feels impossible that 5 decades have passed since Marlena first arrived in Salem. What makes it even more remarkable to me is that the other 2 longest-running stars currently on daytime television are also part of the Days family. Susan Seaforth Hayes has portrayed Julie Williams for 58 years on and off, while Suzanne Rogers has played Maggie Horton for more than 53 years. That kind of longevity in television is almost unheard of. This week, the show gave viewers a perfect opportunity to reflect on Marlena's journey. Marlena sits with a photo album featuring her and John Black on the cover, quietly revisiting memories from her life in Salem. Then comes an unexpected surprise when Paul's return brings him to her door, followed by Belle joining them as Marlena begins her trip down memory lane. Watching those scenes made me think about just how much history this character carries with her. Marlena isn't simply a soap character anymore. In many ways, she feels like one of the foundations of Salem itself. The rise of a Salem icon, 1976 to 1986. When Marlena Evans first arrived in Salem in 1976, she came as a psychiatrist treating Mickey Horton. It didn't take long before she became deeply involved in the lives around her, especially through her relationship with Don Craig. Their marriage was short-lived, and Marlena experienced one of the earliest tragedies of her life when she lost her first child shortly after giving birth. Those early years were anything but quiet. Marlena became one of the targets of the infamous Salem Strangler, adding suspense and danger to what had already become an emotional journey. Then came Roman Brady. Roman entered Marlena's life as her protector, but their relationship quickly became one of Salem's great love stories. Their marriage and the birth of twins Eric and Sammy Brady seemed to promise happiness, but in Salem, happiness rarely lasts for long. Stefano DiMera's shadow loomed over everything, and Roman was eventually presumed dead. Looking back, I think this may have been the moment Marlena truly became the emotional center of the show. Viewers watched her navigate grief, motherhood, and uncertainty, while still remaining the compassionate doctor everyone relied upon. The decade closed with even more turmoil as Marlena grew close to the mysterious amnesiac John Black, a man who at one point believed he was Roman himself. A devastating fall through a window, a coma, and a presumed plane crash eventually led to Marlena's departure from Salem, ending one of the character's most important chapters. Epic love and supernatural terror, 1987 to 1996. If I had to describe the late 1980s and early 1990s in Salem with one word, it would probably be unbelievable. After surviving captivity at Stefano's hands and emerging from her coma, Marlena returned to Salem and reunited with John. Their connection was immediate and undeniable. Then came one of the most famous love triangles in soap history. The real Roman Brady was discovered to be alive, forcing Marlena to choose between the husband she had mourned and the man she had fallen in love with during his absence. John and Marlena's chemistry ultimately proved stronger than circumstances. Their affair became one of the defining stories of the era, especially after Sammy Brady discovered them together. That shocking moment would have lasting consequences for the entire Brady family because it led to the conception of Belle. The eventual revelation that John, not Roman, was Belle's father sent shockwaves through Salem and permanently altered family relationships. But as legendary as the love triangle became, I think most fans would agree that one story towers above all others when discussing Marlena Evans: the possession storyline. Even decades later, it remains one of the most recognizable stories in daytime television history. Stefano's manipulation, Marlena's transformation into the Queen of the Night, the levitation scenes inspired by horror films, and the unforgettable exorcism created moments that soap fans still talk about today. Looking back now, it's hard to imagine a network soap attempting something so bold and so completely committed to its premise. It was outrageous, dramatic, terrifying, and somehow it worked. Chaos, Romance, and the Salem Stalker, 1997 to 2006. The next chapter of Marlena's life was defined by instability, danger, and more twists than almost any character should reasonably survive. Her relationship with John continued its cycle of reunions and heartbreak, while new threats constantly emerged around them. Kristen and DiMera's schemes created endless complications, while weddings, separations, kidnappings, and family conflicts became almost routine parts of life. Then came the Salem Stalker storyline, one of the most ambitious mysteries the series ever attempted. By this point, Marlena had become something larger than a single storyline. She had survived serial killers, presumed deaths, possession, kidnappings, and countless DiMera plots. Yet somehow, she always remained Marlena. Compassionate, strong, resilient. Perhaps that's why audiences have stayed connected to her for so many years. As I look back over these 50 years, I don't think Marlena Evans represents just one great soap character. To me, she represents the history of Days of Our Lives itself. Generations of viewers have grown up alongside her victories, tragedies, romances, and losses. Very few television characters ever become institutions. Marlena Evans is one of them. And 50 years later, Salem simply wouldn't feel like Salem without her. Looking back at the 2003 to 2004 era of Days of Our Lives, I still think the Salem Stalker storyline was one of the wildest risks the show ever took. Salem was gripped by fear as one familiar face after another appeared to be murdered, and Marlena Evans herself was framed for crimes that, as it turned out, never actually happened. It was all part of one of Stefano DiMera's elaborate schemes, and maybe one of the biggest soap opera twists of its time.